is your first time to join this weekly interlude, welcome back if you've been here before. And thank you for joining this so-called break to breathe on our ongoing journey during this historic time. It is actually that sense of history that has intrigued me this week, and especially this past President's Day weekend, when our attention was focused on our nation's capital and the history lessons that were taking place there. I've also been thinking about the confluence of our Jewish and secular calendars, which I know is not surprising. I know, and I will share a bit more about that in a few moments. Somewhere in the last week, probably in anticipation of Lincoln's birthday on Friday, I came across a short passage entitled President Abraham Lincoln's Meditation on the Divine Will. It was evidently never intended for the public, as one of Lincoln's secretaries, John Hay, discovered it after his death. It reveals his deeply troubled mind and spirit at the length of the war, its terrible cost in human loss and suffering, and his need for some sense of moral and even divine affirmation, even while he is trying to accept that those who were fighting for the South considered themselves as morally just as he did. We can feel Lincoln's yearning to rest in a sense of God's presence, to relinquish his crushing responsibilities to a righteous and loving presence beyond him, and yet supportive of him. It feels to me that he was seeking that ahava rabbah, that great and everlasting love that we have talked about here, when I have suggested that we try to feel what the Hasidic masters felt. They believed in a loving God who supports and holds each of us so that we can relinquish our burdens from time to time, knowing that we are not alone in the universe, that we are loved by a deep and abiding love we cannot understand. He wrote these words at a time of great conflict, the worst conflict in our nation's history, when the disagreement at stake, when the passions aroused by the divergent views on slavery could have destroyed this country just 80 some years after it began. Even while Lincoln believes that right is on the side of the North, he struggles with the reality of those who believed differently, who believed God was on their side of the conflict, and unable to see the world in starkly black and white terms, so to speak, Lincoln is trying not only to maintain the humanity of his enemies, he is seeking to go forward with malice toward none, with charity for all, as he would express in his second inaugural address, much of which was based on these preliminary thoughts. Lincoln understood that the future health and viability of the Union depended upon the way the South was treated after its defeat at the hands of the North. No eventual good would come from a South that felt perpetually shamed and humiliated by a North that felt perpetually vindicated, superior, and unrelentingly victorious. His words resonate today with struggle, with questions, with a seeking for assurance, perspective, and support that we still seek and still need. I thought we might use Lincoln's words as a frame for the first part of our meditation. This is what has been called his meditation on the divine will. The will of God prevails. In great contests, each party claims to act in accordance with the will of God. Both may be and one must be wrong. God cannot be for and against the same thing at the same time. In the present Civil War, it is quite possible that God's purpose is something different from the purpose of either party. And yet the human instrumentalities, working just as they do, are of the best adaptation to effect his purpose. I am almost ready to say that this is probably true, that God wills this contest and wills that it shall not end yet. By his mere great power on the minds of the now contestants, he could have either saved or destroyed the Union without a human contest. Yet the contest began. And having begun, he could give the final victory to either side any day. Yet the contest proceeds. So let us take our meditative positions in the face of uncertainty with our too often troubled and searching minds very present with us. Let us sit attentively, but with a sense of ease in our chairs, our feet firmly planted on the ground, on the floor. Let us feel that firmness. It is in short supply in much of our country today. So let us relish the sense that we are at this moment safe, secure, warm. Let us place our hands either gently in our laps or possibly on the arms of our chairs, wherever it makes sense. And I have reflexively already closed my eyes, which may be your practice as well, or just to gaze without focus at some spot in the distance. And let us take that full, deep, restorative breath. Oh, let us feel it filling our bodies. Let us rejoice in it. And yes, yawning may happen automatically. It's that release. It's actually the form of a yawn that we use when we inhale that deep breath. Yawning is more than allowed during meditation. I don't think there is a meditator on earth who has not fallen asleep during many meditations. And let us let the exhaled breath linger just a bit. And let us breathe in Lincoln's opening statement: the will of God prevails. The will of God prevails. And let us relax, even for these few moments, into an acceptance of that belief. Let us relinquish our worries, our anxieties to something greater than we are, something beyond us, within us, around us, holding us in compassion. Let us relinquish our worries, our anxieties to something greater than we are, something beyond us, within us, around us, holding us in compassion. Let us imagine that possibility, Let us imagine it as a reality. And then we can breathe in the freedom of letting go and send out again our burdens to the source of love and strength. Let us breathe in a sense of God's mysterious purpose. Let us breathe in our hope that we are choosing to act in accordance with what God might want of us. And let us breathe out the unavoidable doubt so that we might go forward without that crippling examination. And if it's helpful just to breathe in and breathe out again, and think of nothing but the miracle of that breath going in and out. I invite you to stay with that thought. Lincoln's thoughts eventually evolved into these phrases from the second inaugural address. It may seem strange that any men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces. But let us judge not, that we be not judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. And Lincoln continues a bit later. With firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. I can just breathe in the miraculous nature of that leader's thinking and speaking and true leading. It continues to reverberate with such wisdom and humanity to this very day. And I would add, it reverberates with wisdom, humanity, and humility. Let us breathe in again God's mysterious purpose, of which Lincoln saw himself as an instrument, and breathe out our skeptical, rational objections. Let us breathe in again our hope that our actions most of the time reflect what God might want of us. And we breathe out all of our internal critiques. It's not enough. It's not good enough. You could have. You should have. You failed. Let us breathe in the courage to go forward. And breathe out every hesitation about our place, about ourselves, about the future, about the world. We cannot know. As we have said over and over again, it takes faith to go forward into the uncertainty and unpredictability of the next moment, let alone a more expansive future. Before we conclude, I would share with you that Friday night, February 12th, the night of Lincoln's birthday, and Saturday, February 13th, just this last weekend, were Rosh Chodesh Adar, the first day of the new Jewish month of Adar, which is heralded in the Talmud as the month when our joy increases, because Purim falls on the 14th of the month. We will talk more about Purim next week, but it is more complex than our child-centered celebrations would lead us to believe. A teaching that I just came across for the first time, and that I think relates to Abraham Lincoln's deepest longings, is the following. Our task on Purim is to ascend the ladder of mystical knowing until we reach God's own vantage point, where our human notions of good and evil disappear, where Mordecai, who is the hero, and Haman, the villain, aren't from opposing sides anymore, but are part of a greater whole. What would it feel like to cultivate such a sense of joy on Purim, such a sense of elevated spirit, that we could seek to ascend to that place of wholeness, the ultimate goal of all our strivings, that place of peace? Let us inhale that possibility. Let us inhale that wholeness of seeing all of God's creation as part of a unified entity. Let us inhale that ultimate vision of our faith and, in its best iterations, of our country. And let us breathe out the divisions, the disagreements, the conflicts, the violence. The responses that make the other less. Let us breathe that out. Let us breathe in once more that wholeness. And breathe out every obstacle to its realization. And to close, I thought I might share with you an excerpt from the words of Amanda Gorman, whose poem, The Hill We Climb, so captivated this country just a few weeks ago. She writes, and yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge a union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promise to Glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare. Let this be a week of climbing hills with courage, with will, with the will to dare. God bless you. I look forward to next week.